Hi everyone and welcome to Deep Geek Live. I have got a very special guest on today, someone that I'm sure you all know, someone who's been on this channel before, but I think has got a huge amount of really interesting stuff to say about our topic today. Guys, could you please welcome Quinn from Ideas on Ice and Fire. Do you want to say hi?
Hey, how's it going, guys? You can check me out on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, and I make videos about A Song of Ice and Fire, and I also talk about some other fantasy and sci-fi books, mainly A Song of Ice and Fire and Dune right now. So check out my channel if you haven't seen it. And thank you for having me on.
An absolute pleasure, guys. I would highly recommend you do go and check out the channel. There is a link, hopefully down in the description, if I normally remember to put one down there, and I'm sure one of the moderators will put one in the live chat as well. So guys, we've got a couple of things to talk about today. You'll see the title of this is looking at Aegon, Visenya and Rhaenys, the original three heads of the dragon, but if you're watching this live, then literally within the last hour or two, we've had our first teaser trailer for season 8 of Game of Thrones. So I think we can't really go on with this until we've just quickly covered that. There's not huge amounts about of sort of new information. It has to be said, there's no new footage. But Quinn, why don't you just start us off and let us know what your thoughts are? What can we learn from this?
Okay, so I thought it was a pretty interesting trailer. I mean, you don't want to take anything for sure with something like this, but I'll just tell you what I saw basically. So you have kind of like the ice coming out of the north, and it kind of conquers the wolf, and it conquers the dragon, and then from the south you see the fire conquering the lion, and they come together and kind of meet in the middle, and then they kind of form this kind of barrier, and then it zooms out and it says Game of Thrones, and that's basically what we see. Um, I mean, it was a cool trailer. I don't know if we can. I guess I like the visual of ice and fire coming together, and it does kind of look like it's clashing, but it's also creating something. It's forming some kind of structure. So I don't know if that means anything, but nevertheless, it was an interesting little teaser. It was only like 15 seconds long or something. So
yeah, I think there was a lot of stuff there that we could talk about. But it's very easy. The first thing I would say is it's very easy with this kind of thing to overinterpret it.
Yeah.
There's a good chance that this teaser trailer was made probably before they finished filming the season itself. It's not trying to give us huge amounts of extra information.
Yeah.
That said, what I would try and draw out is, yes, we get this ice coming from the north, this fire coming from the south, and then they join. The couple of things that I would find quite interesting is it looks like they're going over the map in the painted map room, map table in Dragonstone. With you've got those little figures that we've seen being moved around when they're doing all the plotting and planning. And the bit that I'd love to study a little bit closer is when ice and fire come together in this. They create the barrier, as you said. They create this barrier, which looks to me like dragon glass. I don't know whether it actually was dragon glass, but it's almost like when you get frozen flame. Yeah. That is what you get. Is you get dragon glass. So our attention was being drawn to what happens when the two actually come together. Did you get that kind of vibe from it?
It did look like dragon glass, and a thing to point out is dragon glass is literally called frozen fire at some point in the novels. So it does look like dragon glass. So I wonder if that means anything, or it could have just been like a cool looking visual.
Yeah, I mean, it could have just been a cool looking visual. I mean, and this is the kind of thing we don't know because we don't. It's easy to overinterpret, but the kind of the metaphor all through this, with particularly through the books, with the Song of Ice and Fire, is that it's about you get these two forces, ice and fire, who could both destroy the world, and it's about what's in the middle. What is it that comes together? Is formed from ice and fire that creates this hope, if you like, and that it seems is John in some ways, or at least he sort of encapsulates that idea of being both ice and fire. But I think the thing which I found interesting was the idea that this was a barrier.
Mhm.
So they came together, and clearly there was no ice are winning or fire were winning. We were being shown this is the barrier between the two, and this is the thing we're supposed to focus on, is this line between them.
Yeah, so that's interesting because when I think about a song of Ice and Fire, yeah, it is about a joining. But then a song, it's also I think about the word harmony, so it's about them working together with each other. So yeah, I because if we look at the mythology too in their world, it's like after the battle for the dawn or whatever, they all got together and built a wall. And I know the history tells us that the others weren't involved in the building of the wall, but then I just see a giant ice wall and I'm like, I don't know, maybe the others had some involvement in building it. But yeah, so I kind of like the idea of all this stuff that's kind of opposing in some way, joining together and creating something. And I feel like the trailer kind of, and I thought it was interesting also that it's kind of like these forces, ice and fire, they're greater than the Lannisters, they're greater than the Starks, they're greater than the Targaryens, because you see how the ice just kind of goes over everything and the fire just kind of goes over everything. And these two forces meet in the middle, regardless of what the pieces are doing. The pieces are destroyed essentially. So I like that part. I like that bit of the trailer as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the power of the two forces was shown to be very much greater than anything else that was there. I liked the kind of the hint that you got when you had the Lannister lion being overtaken by fire. I was thinking very much of episode 5, whatever it was last season, when you get the field of fire there.
Yeah.
That very much resonated with me. Then there you had the dragon being overtaken by ice. Obviously, we get the imagery that we got in episode 6 of last season, and you then also got, very obviously, you got Winterfell being overtaken by ice. And so I think the clear implication there is that this is what is going to happen in season 8, is that the ice is going to come, or the White Walkers are going to be descending down onto Winterfell. And as we see in the books, it just gets colder and colder and colder. And actually in the books at the moment, even though they're a lot further back in the plot, Winterfell is effectively iced in. Only
Yeah.
one of the gates still works. And so that is a clear kind of teaser about what's going on there.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, the last thing I would do, and guys, I'd be really interested in any thoughts that you have in the chat. We'll have a quick look at that in just 1 second. The other thing that I would kind of draw out was that if this was the painted table, the big in the map room in Dragonstone, which it looked like, then that's another hint to Dragonglass, because obviously, yes, this was like the home base for Daenerys with her re-invasion of Westeros, but also the big sort of reveal there last season was that this is where there's these huge Dragonglass mines, and although it was kind of done as a throwaway thing, they did start mining new Dragonglass there, which should theoretically be quite a big, I don't know whether game changer is the right word, but quite a powerful tool in
Yeah.
fighting against the White Walkers. Do you think that there was anything important or symbolic about the fact that it was apparently Dragonstone?
You mean in the teaser trailer?
Yeah.
Well, like you said, Dragonglass is going to be really useful against fighting the White Walkers, the others, if the Beyond the Wall episode was any indication, because apparently they were using Dragonglass weapons and they totally wrecked the White Walkers somehow. But so I guess, yeah, maybe that could be something of importance. I don't know if this trailer was necessarily trying to say that though. But yeah, I could see that. I definitely see that train of thought and that reasoning. It's not hard to get behind.
No, absolutely. And I think one of the other things that I was just picking up from the chat, which I'd be interested in your views on, Quinn, is that people are saying, so this was about creating a new barrier, an ice and fire barrier. Should we take that literally? Should we see this as being a thing which might actually happen, that there might actually, in season 8, we're going to see a new wall being created? Obviously,
Well,
part of the old wall has been destroyed. Are we going to see a new wall being created?
okay, so I don't know, but I like the idea. If I were to say yes on that, then I would say that I like the reasoning because I've always thought that the reason that the others were coming back was because they made a pact back in the day, and something about that pact wasn't being fulfilled. And so if that did happen, like a clash of ice and fire, so to speak, I mean, the barrier, the new wall would represent a new pact being formed. So it's kind of like, because it's more split equally this time too. It's right down the middle. So it's kind of like a newer, more fair pack, perhaps. That's just a thought. So
Yeah, I like that. There's the idea that the pact could be sealed with a different wall, if that's where we're saying that this came from in the first place.
mhm.
Um, I think I would pick up on a couple of the questions about whether Dragonstone is important because maybe that's where something important happened before. I would just say that we've seen with the Children of the Forest that they seem to pick particularly well, if we kind of merge the show and the books here and try and gain lore from both of them,
Mhm.
their important places seem to be islands in some way. We've got the Isle of Faces, obviously, is an island, and that seems to be in some way the hub of the Weirwood network.
Yeah.
Dragonstone seems to be this mine for dragonglass, and that is also obviously an island. And I think we've not yet learned enough yet about Starfall, but I think that there's significance that too is an island. So I think that the significance of Dragonstone isn't so much that that was where a big battle happened in the past. I think that what that is one of the few areas where we do get dragonglass naturally appearing in large
Ah,
quantities.
okay.
Sorry, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I just think it makes sense. And maybe that was part of the reason why the Targaryens chose the spot in the first place. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. But and this is a complete aside, but perhaps bringing across to Fire and Blood, I think one of the things that I found most striking in Fire and Blood, reading through it, was the that this just seemed to be where dragons naturally gave birth, where dragon eggs
Yeah.
naturally hatched, and it's something that we uh, don't think about too much because there's huge amounts of focus in the second half of the Targaryen reign on how can they hatch a dragon egg, and they're trying all of these things, and
Mhm.
it seems to be previously that it was just a natural thing that happened, as you would expect any animal's eggs to hatch quite naturally. It's just that it seemed to happen on Dragonstone because the
Yeah.
conditions were right because of the sort of the hot air vents and the volcanic basis for it. So
Mhm.
that was the thing. Well, one of the things that really struck me about the importance of Dragonstone was that that was a place, much like Valyria, and dare I say it, potentially much like Winterfell,
Mhm.
where a dragon egg could hatch.
Yeah, there's something special about it. And we do know that dragon glass itself has to possess inherently, innately, some magical characteristics or qualities. Just based on the fact that it kills White Walkers. There is something, and yeah, so perhaps that's tied into it some way. And we do know that it was used in some capacity in Valyria. Obsidian is basically dragon glass, if am I correct? Yeah.
Yeah.
So the glass candles are made out of that as well. So glass candles are used to communicate across great distances and for various magical purposes. So Dragonglass has innate magical characteristics, so maybe that was part of the reason that the Targaryens chose that place in the first place. And maybe that is tied in some way to the dragons and their ability to reproduce in some obscure way that we can't necessarily pinpoint at this point in time because we don't have all the pieces, we don't have enough information. but I could see something there being connected.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's just it's too strong a link for it not to be, pardon me, important in some way. Guys, I just want to take a moment just to say thank you to my latest moderator. Jojo Lady Dane is there. If you're watching this live and in the chat room, please do say hi to her. I really appreciate the work that my moderators do. I think I've got 3 moderators there at the moment. J.R. Rowley and Chrissy Voldstones are there as well. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. It's a fantastic thing that you do. Shall we move on? Unless there's anything else you wanted to say about the trailer. Was there anything you think we've missed on this one?
I think we pretty much covered it thoroughly.
I think I agree with that. I'm waiting for the first new footage. I thought this was great, and I'm now really excited for season 8. But I'm really looking forward to the first bit of new footage that we see. But let's move on to the subject of the video that we advertised, which is Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys. Now, I chose this because this is sort of the starting point of Fire and Blood Part 1, which is the original 3 heads of the dragon, as it were. So we've got these 3 characters who are quite legendary, and they are the founders, effectively, of the modern Targaryen reign. They're the invaders of Westeros. They made the 7 kingdoms united. Obviously, there was the Dawn issue, which I'm sure we'll cover in just a moment. But they brought the kingdom together in a way that sets them apart. Now, I think there's a lot of questions. As always, guys, I've got a few questions from my patrons. Very happy to get any questions from the chat as well. And we did have a super chat actually before we went on air from Maura Lee. Thank you, Maura. That is incredibly generous. I picked up your question from Patreon, and we will cover that in just a moment, if that's okay. But guys, obviously, if there are any super chats, we'll come to them straight away. But let's just start off with something that wasn't in Fire and Blood, but was sort of teased. So we had this question of why did Aegon and his sisters, why did they invade? And George R.R. Martin did this kind of teaser trailer first before Fire and Blood, which said in kind of vague language, yes, some people have speculated that maybe it was because he knew of the threat of the others and he wanted to unite the 7 kingdoms so that he could defend it. What do you make of that, Quinn? Do you think there's, it wasn't mentioned in Fire and Blood, but do you think there's any likelihood of that?
I don't know. When George R. R. Martin said that, I thought there was going to be some kind of hint as to whether it was true or not in Fire and Blood, but there's no indication whatsoever to whether or not it's actually true. And in fact, there's kind of some stuff that's kind of contrary to that if you kind of dig deep. Can't really point out exactly what was contrary to it, but there's a few hints that that's not true. So I don't know. That's very confusing coming from George R. R. Martin, because he usually doesn't say stuff like that if there isn't some hint, or maybe I'm just not looking hard enough. Did you pick up on anything?
I didn't, and my view, which I think I've mentioned before on one of my live streams, that when he was saying there's been some speculation, I think he was talking about in the fan community out here amongst us, rather than among the maesters and the learned people of Westeros in the world he's created. So I think that he was referring to effectively some stuff he'd read on Reddit or something like that. Yeah. So I think that was what was going on there. In my view, having reread several times now the first few chapters, the bits about Aegon, and most of this, for those who haven't read this first bit, it's not exactly, but it's broadly what we saw already in the World of Ice and Fire, this first section. It's very, very similar, a lot of very similar prose. Some of it is literally cut and pasted. But having read that through a few times, what struck me again was that if Aegon had invaded for that reason, nothing he did afterwards seems to back up that idea. Yeah. Because if he was there thinking that he was wanting to protect the 7 kingdoms from the threat from the north, surely one of his priorities would be to go to the north.
Yeah.
And another one to go to the wall. And as far as we can tell, it actually took him something like, I think it was 3 decades or something before he even made it up to Winterfell. It wasn't a priority for him to actually go up to the north and try and help the Night's Watch in any way. So
yeah,
his focus was first of all trying to subdue the all the rebels around there. Lots of focus in on Dawn to the south, but then he had a couple of decades of peace, and he didn't noticeably do anything to support an effort to protect the Seven Kingdoms from an attack from the north. Do you buy into that logic that I sort of set out there?
yeah, I agree. Like, you would think that he would like fly his dragon north. That would be one of the first things that he would do, right? And like kind of give them more men, or like increase their security, or just like anything that he can do to help, But there was no indication whatsoever that he cared or knew anything about the threat of the White Walkers.
Yeah, and I think it doesn't mean that wasn't the case. It just
Yeah.
means that it's not recorded. We don't know
Yeah.
anything about it, so there's no evidence to suggest it's there. By the way, I'm loving your graphics when they're coming out with the little bits from the books and the fire in the background. I think fantastic.
Thank you.
Excellent stuff. We had a super chat from Mazza Monty. Thank you so much. £5. The children used to get dragonglass yearly from the Watch. Must be mega important. I think actually it was the other way round, that the children used to give dragonglass to the Watch every year. And I think, yes, this is important for the reasons that we know it to be important. Similarly, when we get the cache of dragonglass that gets dug up by, on the show it's Sam, in the books sort of Ghost kind of finds it. But there's a cache of dragonglass there that is effectively being given to the Night's Watch. I think that's Bloodraven who has buried it there for them to find. But the reason being that this is the way to kill White Walkers, the others. This is their weakness, and the Children of the Forest knew that was their weakness, and that's why they provided dragonglass to the Night's Watch,
just in case.
Exactly, just in case. So they provided some every year as a sort of this is our part of the effort. We've been involved in helping build the wall, and we're now sort of hiding away, but we're still providing you a little bit of help along the way. Okay, so we've got this invasion that happens, and we sort of asked already why it was that they invaded, but let's take a step back to look at this whole section. I mean, it's a question about the book as a whole, Fire and Blood. It's something that I've talked about a few times already, but how seriously can we take it? Should we take it as the literal truth of what has happened? And this is building on a question from Piano Diva 11, one of my Patreons, saying, please discuss the role of propaganda and whether the story we think we know about Aegon, Visenya and Rhaenys can be believed as presented. Archmaester Gildane seems a bit over the top, viewing Aegon as almost a godlike figure in a few places. And then she references the line Littlefinger has about the realm. Do you know what the realm is? It's the 1,000 blades of Aegon's enemies, a story we agree to tell each other over and over until we forget that it's a lie. So the sort of the top level question here is, how seriously should we take this? Should we actually believe what we read about these characters in Fire and Blood?
Okay, so of course take everything with a grain of salt, because this is a maester's point of view. And yeah, there's obviously going to be places where stuff is less accurate. Like, one thing that I see in this book a lot in particular is that a lot of women just get called witches. It's like something bad happens and, oh, she's a sorceress, she did that. That happens to Visenya Targaryen. It's actually suggested in this very book that she actually killed Aegon. Whether or not she did, I don't think she did. Whether or not she was doing sorcery, that might actually be something. But yeah, the role of propaganda is definitely something we have to consider, and we have to consider who is giving us this information and what their agenda is. And like I always say, we really can't necessarily 100% take what the maesters are saying as fact, especially when it comes to the Targaryens, because they might have had some kind of role in the downfall of the Targaryens. I mean, a lot of people think this. So yeah, I mean, we definitely have to take it with a grain of salt. I definitely think there is a lot of truth here. There's a lot of stuff here that is certainly accurate, and that is. But I guess we just have to be diligent in picking out what could be, I guess, kind of not true, and what is more likely to be accurate. Got to take it on a case-by-case basis, I think.
Yes. And so I think it's probably worth us doing what George R. R. Martin probably would want us to do if we're being sort of getting into literary criticism of this, which is actually look at the character of Archmaester Gildane. Now, we don't know huge amounts. One of the things we do know is that he, fascinatingly, was the maester who was present at the tragedy at Summerhall.
Yes.
And he was the one who wrote that. If you've read The World of Ice and Fire, you'll know that kind of like account of it with lots of ink blots, so we don't really
Wildfire.
And yeah, so he was there, and he I think we will find out at some point what his role was there, but he clearly was therefore attached to the Targaryens in some way.
Yeah.
And you pointed out one of the clear biases that he has, which is the, you know, I lost count of the amount of female characters who were introduced, and then something mysterious happened, and then he just said, well, maybe they were a witch then. That came again and again. But there's also a huge amount of other things, particularly with Jaehaerys and anything with Septon Bart. He seems so just in love with him. Everywhere he went, the crowds were cheering. It was just it's too much to believe all the time, and just seems to gloss over some of the things that we might actually stop and go, well, hang on a moment, that's not 100% good what that person did just then.
Yeah.
So I think perhaps it might be useful for us to try and think, what would this story be like if it were written from the perspective of one of the people on the other side of the invasion, say from Harren the Black, even, whose name alone seems to be slightly propaganda-ish. What would he think to this foreigner who came in and burned down his castle?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because Aegon cooked this guy alive in his own castle, along with his remaining sons and all of everyone else that was in the castle too. So that's kind of, I mean, it's not even it's brutal. It's quite kind of barbaric, actually. And I know Aegon, everyone's like, oh, Aegon, he was a conqueror, so. What were you going to say?
No, I think that this is exactly the point I'm trying to make, is that, yeah, he's a conqueror. And whether you see somebody as being, well, this was good and right, and of course he went and got rid of all of the bad kings who were there before, that's the story we're being told in Fire and Blood, effectively. Yeah. We get all of these, the characters who are opposed are generally seen in quite a bad light. But you could also see it as this was somebody who saw a chance for him to gain extra power and be king of a land that he hadn't been born in and didn't know and hadn't grown up in, and so he went there and killed anyone who disagreed with him.
Yeah.
I mean, I mentioned it in my video of 10 takeaway points, or whatever I called it, from Fire and Blood, that for me it's most apparent with Jaehaerys, where we see that his approach, Archmaester Gildane's approach, seems to be very much that this is a great king who did marvelous things, and undoubtedly he did do a number of good things.
He did.
But The one thing that troubles me hugely about, or one of many things that troubles me hugely about his reign, is the way that he seems to come up with the what is called as the sort of the Targaryen exceptionalism, which is effectively some kind of racial superiority, which is saying Targaryens are better. Your rules, the rules of other gods, they don't apply to us.
Yes.
Therefore, we can do whatever we want to. And that I find incredibly sinister. And he then followed it up with effectively a propaganda campaign. He got people going out there telling people that this was the truth. And you could, the way that it was spun in the Fire and Blood is actually quite positive. It's that he went out there and persuaded the people, and they loved these wonderful speakers and all the rest of it. But there's an undertone there that I find quite troubling.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
Okay, so let's move on to a few of the specifics now about what we've got. Now we've got the Iron Throne. Now, this is the question. Maura Lee, thank you so much for your very generous super chat before we started. You were asking about the Iron Throne. Now, the Iron Throne, legendarily, it was forged from the swords of the defeated foes in the conquest. So they were taken, and Balerion the Black Dread, he with his dragon fire forged them together into this throne. So the question is, could Dany's dragons reverse that process in some way? Perhaps with someone like Gendry's assistance to get to the blades and reforge new swords. Might there be some Valyrian steel swords in there that could perhaps be salvaged to help the battle? What do you think? Do you think, first of all, that there are possibly any Valyrian steel swords in there? And then, as a sort of a follow-up to that, if so, can they be salvaged?
Okay, so I kind of have. Okay, so I think about Valyrian steel and what it is. We don't know exactly where it comes from. We don't know exactly what makes it. We just know it's to create Valyrian steel. It has some kind of fire and blood magic. Basically, all Valyrian magic was rooted in fire and blood. So we know that the Iron Throne itself was forged with the fire of Balerion the Black Dread, and Targaryen kings have died on the throne. So the swords have touched Dragonfire. They've been baptized in Targaryen blood. Maegor the Cruel is one that died. So maybe the swords themselves have taken on some kind of magical characteristics themselves, and they are kind of proto-Valyrian swords in a sense. This is a theory that I kind of came up with a while ago. So maybe in the end, they could kind of take them apart and they would be even more useful against the others. But as far as like Valyrian steel swords just being down in there from that were taken by Aegon, I don't think so. I think they probably would have kept the Valyrian steel and maybe saved it if they could have found it. I don't think they would have melted it down and made it part of the other swords. But I like the idea of the throne itself being dismantled, because it really is just kind of a dark symbol. It's a symbol of this this Targaryen dynasty, which was truly a dynasty of fire and blood. It was kind of not really, I mean, it's kind of painted in this book. It's kind of like this great rosy time, but really there was a lot of violence, a lot of death, a lot of infighting, even amongst the Targaryens themselves. So it kind of wasn't really that great of a time. I think there could be something better. And I think it would be cool if Dany herself, a Targaryen, is the one to dismantle that throne and to build a new symbol for Westeros. So those are kind of my thoughts on all that.
Well, I'd love to come on to that thought in just a moment about the fate of the Iron Throne, the idea that Dany might build something new. I'd love to come back to that. In terms of the throne itself and what's in there, I tend to agree with you that if there were Valyrian steel swords, the Valyrian steel swords are so rare that I find it inconceivable that the Targaryens would just use them as just another random sword to be forged into part of the Iron Throne. And it also, because they would be so rare, you would actually notice if there was one of them. I suspect somebody at some point would go, hang on a moment, that bit of steel there looks a little bit more better wearing than the rest. It looks different to the rest, a slightly more rippled effect to it. And I suspect somebody would have noticed and said something by now. But I think on a practical, so firstly, I suspect that there weren't any Valyrian steel swords there, and they were either given back to a noble family, or the families did not actually hand over those swords. So, for example, we found that Torrhen Stark, the Stark who knelt, the king who knelt, he handed over his sword. Now, that wasn't ice, so he wasn't handing over the ceremonial sword. He was handing over another sword. So it wasn't that people were handing over a particular sword. They were just whatever they happened to be fighting with, is my best understanding. But secondly, we have to understand quite how hot Balerian's dragonfire is. This is fire which melted stone and in Harrenhal. So it's incredibly hot, and it would have melted together all of the normal swords into just this huge congealed mass. So yes, there are sharp edges and all the rest of it, but I don't think it is now possible to extract out individual swords from that. The one exception would be Valyrian steel, which we know because Blackfire, the sword Blackfire, was in Aegon the First's funeral pyre, when I think one of the dragons, I forget, it might have been Varaxis, Vagar, sorry, his dragon flame set that funeral pyre alight, and Blackfire was rescued from it afterwards. So clearly Dragonfire does not affect Valyrian steel, but all of the other swords would have been melded into one, I think. Can I pick up then on that point that you're making just the end about the Iron Throne? Because I would agree that the Iron Throne has this huge symbolic sort of importance, that this was the symbol of Targaryen rule, one of the symbols of Targaryen rule, of all of the defeated foes. And so Aegon would sit on there, the other two would sit on the Iron Throne as well, and then all the other kings would sit on the Iron Throne. And it kind of works for me if that ends at the end of Game of Thrones. The Iron Throne is, I think, probably melted by Dragonfire. But you're talking about Dany reforging it or recreating something. Could you just expand on that a little bit?
Not reforging the Iron Throne, dismantling it, destroying it, and just creating an entirely new symbol out of something else, or just not necessarily a sword of thrones, just not even necessarily a throne. You know what I mean? Just getting rid of that symbol and creating a new symbol. Because I think that Daenerys, her whole thing is, I'm going to break the wheel. I'm going to remake the world. I am the Misa. I am the fire. I am the rapid change that's coming to change everything and shake stuff up and get rid of these old systems and put new systems in place. So that's kind of how I see it. And also to that point about the throne, I also think people tend to think about the television show version of the throne and not the book version of the throne. Like all those swords are, I guess, not really usable. It's kind of like a bunch of jagged, bent. It's got like steps, and it looks totally different than kind of like the smooth, kind of bent swords from the show. Because in the show throne, it kind of looks like you could like reach on the back and grab one of those swords and like run off with it, almost. But the books, it's not like that. There's no like point where you can like grab a sword and like hold on to it, and like this is a full sword. So yeah.
Yeah, agreed. And I think it would be a topic for another day about what the end game there is with Dany. So I personally do not think we're going to end up with Dany on the throne. So I think that although she may be wishing to break the wheel, I think that she's actually wishing to only break the wheel on her own terms. I think that when she says that, she imagines actually breaking the wheel means Targaryen's back in control. And that's what her vision is. Yes, she might want to make a few changes, but I can't see that she actually wants to completely change the way that the country is governed.
Mm-hmm.
Just to pick up on a couple of quick things I saw in the chat about Valyrian Steel. As we've got Quinn here, just some thoughts. Dragonfire Bite This says Dragonfire doesn't affect Valyrian steel. Well, now Euron's Valyrian steel armor seems to be a lot more useful. I bet it also protects against magic. Just this is a huge digression, but for those who don't know, in one of the pre-release chapters from the Winds of Winter, we see Euron wearing what appears to be a full suit of Valyrian steel armor, which is firstly absolutely priceless, but secondly seems to be incredibly useful in combat. What are your kind of thoughts there? My initial thought would be, oh, well, this would be really useful in a battle against the White Walkers, but do you think it could also be useful in a battle against the dragons?
I don't think it's going to protect you from heat, but I like the thought of it protecting against magic, because what's more interesting than it being made out of Valyrian steel is the fact that it has all these runes on it. So I wonder what these runes are for. What do they do? So I kind of like the idea of them protecting him against some kind of magic, or protecting him in some other way that we maybe haven't foreseen yet. So yeah, as far I don't think it will. I don't think if a dragon breathes fire on Euron while he's wearing the Valyrian steel armor, I don't think he's not gonna burn. So, but useful against the White Walkers, certainly.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that, and I think that yes, if he got hit by Dragonfire, then the armor might well survive, but I suspect he would cook. I think that's probably the way it would go. It's not that it prevents the conduction of heat. I don't think he's completely protected. And just on another question, Phil H, just about Valyrian steel. To forge Valyrian steel, says Phil, it's not just the use of Dragonfire, but where does Tywin find someone that can make two swords from ice? So this is the issue here, which is the difference between creating Valyrian steel and reforging it once you've already got some. Yeah. And the knowledge to how to create it has gone. That disappeared with old Valyria. That seems to have involved Dragonfire, yes. But the knowledge of how to reforge it is still out there in various places. Clearly, the Citadel seem to know it because they can forge one of the links in the chain, Valyrian steel, for those who are experts in the higher mysteries. And secondly, there are some blacksmiths in Tobbo Mott, who's the finest blacksmith in King's Landing, learnt his craft when he was in Qohor, and they understand how to reforge Valyrian steel. So there are some people who can do it, but nobody that we know of can create it anew. Is there anything you'd want, before we sort of move on from Valyrian steel, is there anything else you'd want to add, Quinn?
No, that was pretty good.
Excellent. Okay, so we did have a super chat just quickly. Higa Hoga, thank you so much. That's very generous. Just a quick wave this week. Hi, good to see you. I am waiting for something specific in Jaehaerys's reign. Yeah, I'll definitely be doing probably a couple of videos about Jaehaerys, and I'm sure at least a live stream as well. There was a lot. What I found on Jaehaerys was I think George R. R. Martin said that section was the bit of the book that he enjoyed writing the most, and I think it shows. I think that it's quite a fast pace before Jaehaerys, and then afterwards, when we get into the Dance of the Dragons and everything, it's very frenetic, lots going on all over the place. But when you get into the Jaehaerys reign, then the pace kind of slows a little bit, and it gives you a chance to understand the characters a little bit more, and we get a few really quite visceral scenes about what's been going on, and particularly things like Arya and the fireworms and things like that I was talking to Quinn beforehand about he's done a video on that already, and I suspect I probably will at some point too, and I suspect we will definitely cover it in a live stream. Guys, as always, about halfway through, I try and take a quick pause just to let you know what's coming up on this channel. What is happening, as I'm sure you've seen, I've started to be creating videos on Fire and Blood. My first one will be coming out. Well, I did my first one, my 10 takeaway points, a couple of days ago. If you've not checked that out, please do go and have a look at it. But in terms of issues, I'm going to be going through issues that have been come out and look at them in a little bit more detail. One of them that we'll talk about a little bit in a moment, actually, that I'm going to be doing a video on probably for Sunday or possibly Monday, is on the letter that Aegon received from Prince Nymor that changed his mind about the war in Dawn, that led to him accepting peace terms. I've long been fascinated about that. We knew about that before Fire and Blood, but now we've got a whole lot more sort of other information around it. So I feel reasonably confident I understand that a lot better than I used to. So that's what's coming up. I've got a number of different videos going on there over the course of the next few weeks. On my second channel, for those who don't know, my second channel, The Well Told Tale, there's probably a link down in the description. That's me reading what I consider to be the finest science fiction and fantasy stories ever written. Long form, no adverts in the middle, just me doing audio narrations, averaging about 45 minutes per episode, one a week every Wednesday. We've gone through already, we've done Frankenstein, More of the Worlds, we did a Conan story last week, and I've just started, in the build-up to Christmas, it's a Christmas ghost story, A Christmas Carol. It's one of my favourite Christmas stories, and I'm sure it's one of yours. It will be done over 3 weeks, and I've just started it. So if you're at all interested in that, please do go and check out The Well Told Tale. The other thing I would say, because I say it every time, patrons, I cannot do this without you. Thank you so much for your support. I released a little bit of bonus audio material for you a couple of days ago, and there's exclusive for my patrons, and there's going to be a little bit more coming in another few days as well. Just some of the pre-released sections from Fire and Blood that were out there in the public domain. So I've just been doing audio narrations of them for my patrons. But Quinn, what's going on your channel and in the wider world? What should people be looking out for?
Well, you can check out my most recent video on Arya Targaryen and fireworms. And then if you like Dune, you can check out my channel too, because I'm working on my Heretics of Dune video, which is the 5th part. Wait, no, it's the 6th part of my Ultimate Guide to Dune video series, where I'm breaking down Dune, which is my all-time favorite sci-fi series at this point. And yeah, A Song of Ice and Fire theories, live streams, podcast. Yeah, so just check me out. I've got a lot of interesting stuff coming up. The next video that will be uploaded on my channel will be a video about Daenerys and her dragon eggs and the origins of them. And yeah, so check that out if you're interested. And follow me on Twitter, like me on Facebook.
Excellent. And I do follow you on Twitter. Guys, if you don't follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, just go have a look for in Deep Geek and you will find me there. Let's get back to this subject then of Aegon and Visenya and Rhaenys. And I said a moment ago that I would talk about, as I always tend to do, I'll be spoiling my next video a little bit here. But we had a question from one of my patrons, which was from Brian Price, saying, was it true that one of those sisters was grounded in Dawn and possibly didn't die and was tortured to extract Aegon's withdrawal from Dawn? So I'll quickly set out the background to this, and then I'd be really interested in your thoughts on this, Quinn, as well. What happened was you had this very long drawn-out battle with Dawn. Dawn did not submit. All the other parts of the Seven Kingdoms submitted in one way, shape, or form. Some fought, some didn't, but Dawn refused to, and they got caught up in this huge and very bitter guerrilla war effectively, and the Targaryens would go in and they would burn down castles and all the rest of it, and the Dornish forces would just disappear into the sands. And this got more and more heated over time. And yes, eventually we got the situation where Queen Rhaenys on her dragon, Meraxus, she got shot down with a scorpion bolt in the eye of the dragon, which brought the dragon down. And so, excuse me, guys, I got a little bit of a cold coming, which is why I keep on sniffing. But so she got brought down, and we don't know exactly what happened to her, but she was missing, presumed dead. Now then, much later on, we get a new ruler in Dorne, who's this guy called Prince Nymor, and he suggests that they have a peace treaty, and as part of this peace treaty, that Dorne weren't going to submit, and Aegon was about to say no, but then he gets handed a letter. And the letter, what was in the letter, made him change his mind. So I think what I might do actually is quickly read that section, because I've got it right in front of me. It was then that Princess Deria presented the king, this is King Aegon, with a sealed letter from her father. "For your eyes only, your grace," she said. King Aegon read Prince Nymor's words in open court, stone-faced and silent, while seated on the Iron Throne. When he rose afterward, men said his hand was dripping blood. He burned the letter and never spoke of it again. But that night he mounted Balerion and flew off across the waters of Blackwater Bay to Dragonstone upon its smoking mountain. When he returned the next morning, Aegon Targaryen agreed to the terms proposed by Nymor. Soon thereafter, he signed a treaty of eternal peace with Dorne. So something in this letter changed his mind. And the question we have was what was in that letter, effectively saying, we've got your sister and we will kill her or torture her unless you agree to peace. What do you reckon to that?
I agree. I like that idea, and the fact that his hand was said to be dripping with blood is kind of an indication that they did something really medieval and chopped off a body part and sent it to him. So that is something that has happened before in the series. It's something that was actually done. It was a practice. At least I think it was. Maybe that's just something that happens in books and movies. I'm pretty sure that's happened before. But yeah, I think they probably sent him a body part of some sort and said, yeah, this is hers. You probably recognize it. And that made, yeah, I think that's the only thing that could have made him stop. Because one thing is, too, I like to look at the relationship between Aegon and his sisters. He really, 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 I think he loved Rhaenys the most, right? That's pretty obvious. But I think he needed Visenya the most. But he loved Rhaenys the most. And I think that if you want to manipulate Aegon, if you want to bend him to your will, you attack who he loves. And I think that's what happened. Because at first we have the yellow toad of Dorne, and she's really resisting. And when she dies, that's when Nymor steps in. He's like, okay, there's enough fighting. We'll keep her alive and we'll kill her. Maybe we'll stop even torturing her. We'll put her in better living conditions. We'll treat her well, but you have to stay in line. Stop attacking us, and we get to be independent. I think that's the only thing that could have bent Aegon. Because what else bent Aegon? Nothing else would bend Aegon. Nothing else but that. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, I agree that this was about Rhaenys. I think that there are very few. We don't know huge amounts about Aegon, but we only hear of two things that he loved. One of them was Dragonstone. He loved being at Dragonstone, and the other was Rhaenys. And so the way I read it is that the letter, whatever was in the letter, made him angry. I think that it's not 100% clear in the language, but the implication was that he was gripping the Iron Throne so tightly that made his hand drip. That's how I read it anyway. I think if there were a body part there, given that he was in open court, somebody would have seen it personally. So I don't think that was what was going on. So it made him angry, and yet at the same time, he appeared not to be angry with the Martells, because 10 years later, then he goes on what appears to be a celebration of 10 years of friendship, not just I've agreed to cease hostilities with these people who have got the woman I love locked away somewhere. That doesn't kind of ring true to me. So I will set this out properly in a video, as I said, in a few days' time. I tend to the view that yes, Rhaenys did survive. I think we need to look to where was it that she fell, and where she fell was with at a place called Hellholt with House Ulla, who were known for being particularly brutal. And the whole imagery around that house is, as you might gather from Hellholt, it's very hellish. The languages that are there, the word brimstone is used for the river that's running through, and I think one of them is even called Lucifer. I think it's that there's an incredibly dark feel about that. So I agree it's entirely likely that she might have survived and been tortured. I just wonder whether the letter said, and we've discovered her, and she's now dead, and I've taken her body up to Dragonstone or something like that, because the going up to Dragonstone is the bit that's that always gets me, is that he didn't read the letter and immediately change his mind. That's not what happened. What happened was he read the letter, he burned it, he flew to Dragonstone, he flew back, and then changed his mind. So go on.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was going to say, so he went up to Dragonstone, saw Rhaenys' body, and then was like, okay, she's dead. And then he swore eternal peace with Dorne.
Yeah, so I, as I say, I've not scoped it out entirely, but I could see something like the first reaction is anger. He reads a letter that says that the woman you love was tortured for years. That would make him angry, but that would not, in and of itself, nor would, and we're going to carry on doing it unless you accept our peace terms, that would not create the reaction that we got afterwards. He did not immediately then try and save the woman he loved. He did not then have a grudging peace with Dorne. He then claimed that they were friends years later, Seven Kingdoms and Dorne. It didn't seem to be this blackmail issue that was going on, to my mind.
Yeah.
So I wonder whether they could have done something and said, okay, we accept the fact that we've got a lot of people who do bad stuff in Dorne, but as a gesture of goodwill, like they brought back, incidentally, the dragon's skull back as a gesture of goodwill, they might have said, but we did rescue this. We know that your traditions are to burn the bodies. It's pretty horrific. It's been mangled and lots of bad things, but we promise this is it, and you can burn the body as you wish. And yet Aegon wouldn't want people to know what happened to the woman that he loved and all the horrific things that might have happened to her. That kind of, for me, adds up, that they say, well, we promise we will do this, and here's the proof, and let's have peace, because this is hurting all of us.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Good. Well, I should carry on making that video then. This is I've got your ideas of Ice and Fire's thumbs up on that one.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, let's we're going to start taking a few questions from the chat. We've got LML in there. Hi, LML. Good to see you. LML is wading in on this one, saying that's what I think. The Dornish threatened him and told him they could kill his family on Dragonstone at any time, and Aegon saw it was true when he went back. So yeah, I think that's another one, another possibility. I think
I wanted there to be a body part so bad. I really did. I said I wanted there to be a body part so bad. I just thought like, but it makes so much sense that he was just gripping the Iron Throne. God damn it. I was like, damn it, he's right. He's right.
Yeah. Well, I just think there were two things that were said there in that section, which they weren't throwaway. The first one, it was open court. And so, which means people were watching him. Obviously, they were watching. He was about to declare war again on Dawn, and then got handed a letter dramatically, and everyone was watching with bated breath. I think if there had been like an arm or something,
would have been obvious.
Yeah,
well, I was thinking more like an ear, but yeah, it still would have been obvious.
I think even so, it was the kind of thing that I personally think you wouldn't have been able to get away with without that. But I think. And the fact that he was seated on the Iron Throne, I think it kind of makes sense of the blood. But just to pick up on Alamel's point there about whether or not they could have threatened the family, I think that's entirely true. But he already knew that the family were at risk. There'd been attempts on his life and his family's life for years by this point, and I think that. Just to threaten them again doesn't actually make huge amounts of difference to the situation that he knew that they were already in. Lots of lords had been killed by assassins already by that point, by Dornish assassins. So I don't think that would have made enough of a difference for him to immediately change his mind. Okay, so let's have a quick look through. Lindy Whitman says, but Dawn just got a new ruler. Maybe the previous ruler was fine with war and torture, but the new guy was like, we've had her this whole time. Let's use her to stop this madness. That's true. There was a change in ruler. So we had Meria Martell, who was clearly very strong in her view that Dawn would not submit and do absolutely anything to make sure that this did not happen, even causing huge amounts of misery to her own people. And then when her son Nymor took over, clearly he'd had enough. And so, yes, he'd sent up, and this incidentally is another kind of aside on the issue of the threatening bit. He sent his own daughter and heir to carry this message to King's Landing. I don't think if he was sending a message that said, I'm going to kill one of your people, or I've got your loved one here, anything that would make Aegon angry with the Martells, why on earth would he send his own daughter there? Because he would have known full well that Aegon would have taken it on his daughter. So I think that is evidence that he did not think that he was going there with something which would make Aegon angry with the Martells. Yeah. Amy Bennett says, ooh, I like Robert's haircut. Thank you very much. Andrew Kay says, apparently Visenya didn't react well to the dragon skull being returned. I can't remember that exactly. Do you remember that bit, Quinn?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Okay. Wassa30 says, remember the eggs here kept in Dragonstone. What if he flew to Dragonstone to retrieve an egg to give it to the Dornish? Well, that would be quite an interesting take on it. We've not heard of an egg being in Dawn that they're using, so it's possible, but that I think is it's not really, doesn't really fit in with the who's in the powerful position here.
Yeah,
I don't think that the letter would have said, if you give us a dragon egg, then we'll stop fighting. I don't think that's what it was about. I think it's more the other way around, that the Targaryens were going to carry on, and the Martells had to do something or say something to persuade them to stop doing that. So Karen Pierre says Rhaenys was lost for 3 to 5 years. If Dawn had Rhaenys in chains, they would have used her to negotiate a peace treaty years ago. But no, more likely. So yeah, this is, well, there are two issues here. The first one, as we've said, there was a change of leader.
Yeah.
So that there could well be completely different tactics here. And secondly, if she was being held, then she would probably be held somewhere underneath the Hellholt rather than in Sunspear. So it may well be that they didn't even know at the time that she was there, that the Martells were unaware until later on. That's possible. But I think more important is this change of leader going on. Okay, let's take a step back from that. That's a really interesting points there in the chat, guys. Thank you so much. Let's take a step back and think about this rule more generally. Now, one of the big things that I think came out from Fire and Blood was that the Targaryen women had a lot stronger role than we previously thought.
Yeah.
And what we see here is that, yes, Aegon was the king, but it's very clear that whenever he did, as sort of he spent half his year, it would appear, going out around the kingdom, he went with one of the sisters and the other one stayed on the Iron Throne and effectively ruled from the Iron Throne. Yeah. So it was a lot more of a partnership. How do you think that partnership worked in practice, given the what we know of the different characters?
Okay. Well, I think when it comes to Aegon and Visenya, I feel like things, for the most part, for a lot of it, were probably kind of... Visenya had the power to check Aegon. There's that one scene where she's telling him that he needs more protection, and he's like, I don't need protection. And so she literally cuts him with her own sword, like, yeah, you do. So Visenya had the power to put him in check, right? So that's why I started to touch on this earlier when I was like, he really loved Rhaenys the most, but he needed Visenya. Visenya was, I would argue, just as strong as Aegon, if not stronger. Visenya was a true Targaryen, a warrior. So Visenya, I think Visenya had a big role in all of this. And I'm not trying to discount Rhaenys' role as well. I know Rhaenys did a lot of great things too. But yeah, but I think at the end of the day too, it was probably like, yes, you are my sisters and you are queens, but I am Aegon, I am king at the end of the day. But I definitely think that it's a balancing act between the three of them. I don't think he could have gotten it done without those two, especially not Visenya. So yeah,
I agree. So the dynamic seems to have been that Visenya was an incredibly strong character, very warlike and willing to stand up to Aegon on a lot of issues. Aegon still seemed to have the veto. We saw that actually the thing that we were talking about a moment ago. Then we got Visenya was all in favor of rejecting this offer of peace, but it was Aegon's decision that mattered. Rhaenys, however, seemed to have been a lot more about actually trying to encourage the good things in life. She spent a lot of time with musicians and things like this, and actively encouraged the arts, so to speak. And that is actually what building a nation is more about. Visenya was a lot more about the war and the sort of subduing the enemies. But in terms of actually bringing people together, what seems to have been the most important thing is the intermarriages, which both Visenya and Rhaenys were very involved in. When I say intermarriages, different houses marrying each other to try and build some bonds across the piece, and also her role in encouraging a lot more corporate culture, if that kind of makes sense, across the Seven Kingdoms, not just each kingdom having its own culture and own way of doing things.
Yeah.
So what do you think of... I think we often talk a lot about Visenya. What's your take on Rhaenys then? What do you think? I mean, I just gave a few thoughts myself. What's your take on what she brought to this partnership? And it was a partnership.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. Even though she, I guess, is more gentle than Visenya, she's still a conqueror herself, and she's more of the diplomat, and she's more of kind of bringing a little bit more of like the love into it, I guess. And it does say that, um, well, we all know that Aegon loved her more than Visenya. I don't know if he I guess he loved her more romantically than Visenya. She was more of his romantic partner, whereas Visenya was more of kind of like they had a different sort of relationship. But yeah, I would never say that Rhaenys wasn't instrumental in the building of the kingdom and the foundation of the Seven Kingdoms as kind of like this one force operating together. And yeah, she did do things that fed into the culture and yeah, so like I said, and she was a ruler herself. She was a great ruler. I mean, she stood in, like you said, she sat the throne when Aegon would leave and take Visenya with him, or Visenya was doing something else. Rhaenys sat on the throne as well, so she held counsel. She was definitely competent. She was a competent leader, a competent ruler, and a competent warrior. And I guess she just had more of kind of like she was more of a people person, I guess, than Visenya, because I'm just looking at this right here. It's Visenya no peace without submission. So Visenya was very much conquer you no matter what. But I feel like Rhaenys was more like, okay, we can have a conversation, we can talk about this. So yeah, they brought different things to the table, and I think they're both needed. They were both necessary components. And then Aegon is the strong figure in the middle.
Yeah, they very much did work together with each other's strengths, and I think what's interesting is because Rhaenys died relatively early in the reign, that has to have changed the dynamic.
It
And
did.
what we see though is that after we get the end of the ongoing battle with Dawn, the war with Dawn, we get a couple of decades of effectively building the kingdom, trying to bring it together. And Aegon did a lot of work going around the kingdom. He did some very kind of canny realpolitik stuff with the Faith of the Seven, making sure that they were on side. And he made sure that people saw him and the dragons a lot so that they knew what it was that they were or who it was that was ruling them. So what would you say overall, when we're thinking about Aegon the First, we've got this, what we've already talked about as being quite a biased account, a very positive, glossed view of the reign and rule of Aegon the First. Because let's face it, if you accept the fact that he has a right to rule, then that allows his successors some sort of right to rule. If you say that he did not have a right to rule, then his successors definitely don't have a right to rule. Would you say that Aegon, and by extension Visenya and Rhaenys, was Aegon a good king? And you interpret the word good in any way you want, but was he a good king?
I think he was probably as good as anyone that was ruling before him. I don't see anything about Aegon in particular that necessarily stands out as like I'm a great king. He was certainly competent, but like would the king be better or worse if the Targaryens had never come into power? I can't say that the kingdom would be better if I can't see that the kingdom is better because the Targaryens took over everything. You know what I mean? I certainly think he was competent. I think he was a fair leader, but he also burned 4,000 men alive on the field of fire. So I guess he was competent, but as far as good, I'm in the word good, it's like it's kind of like it's no one is 100% good or evil. We all know that. I don't think he was necessarily malicious or he wasn't a vicious person, but he did have that Targaryen fierceness that if you crossed him, he would strike relatively hard.
Yeah, and I like your use of the word competent there. And this, I think this was perhaps what I was trying to draw out, was that clearly he achieved what he set out to do, which was to conquer Westeros. Yes, there were a few messy bits at the side. The Dawn bit didn't go quite as well as he wanted to. But broadly speaking, he conquered the land and then he held it to the extent that the last couple of decades, or 2/3 of his reign, really was not peaceful, but relatively peaceful. And he had the time, therefore, to actually start trying to build a cohesive center for where the new capital was going to be, and a more cohesive set of laws of the land and things like that. So he did the right things in the sense of, if you were going to be somebody invading a land and then taking it over in the same mold, I would say, and I think that George R. R. Martin has probably said that this is one of the inspirations for the character, as William the Conqueror when he came over with the Norman invasion of England. And you would say he probably wasn't good in a kind of a morally upright way, but he was definitely competent. He did all the things that you would expect a king like that to do. In terms of whether he was actually good, I think I would just come back to what we said earlier. It really is depending on which side of this you're looking at. Is this, if you're looking at it from the side of the Targaryens have brought good things to this land, then you would probably wish to justify what he was doing. If you weren't coming from that perspective, then you would say, yes, this guy authorized and personally carried out the murders, effectively, of thousands, tens of thousands of innocent people. What happened in Dawn was horrific, and burning down the Harrenhal, for example, that wasn't just the ruler and his couple of sons that were killed. That was lots and lots of other people who were also murdered, and this was, you could look across the piece. It was a hard time, and he was a hard man, and he delivered stuff. That doesn't necessarily mean that everything he did was morally upright.
I definitely agree.
We've had super chat. Thank you so much, Bridget Walsh, saying, wishing everyone a very ice and fire filled holidays. Thanks to Robert and Quinn for bringing extra warmth to the winter magic. You're very welcome. Thank you so much, Bridget. That's very kind. I think we're going to I've got one more question in my mind, and then I want to take a couple more questions from the chat. So, guys, if you're wanting to drop any more questions down now,
there's one I want to answer from the chat too.
Oh well, why don't we pick up on that one first? Then, what was the question you want to answer?
So this is 9 Nichols. She says, Q&A. Do you guys think Aegon was sterile? And I know right off the bat that might sound like a crazy question, but then you think about the fact that Rhaenys kind of slept around. Could we be sure that her son was Rhaenys, right, was actually Aegon's son? And then Visenya is very interesting to me, because I know this Maestri accuses women of being witches all the time. But there's something strange about Maegor and the circumstances of his birth, because she could not get pregnant for a very long time, and then suddenly she's pregnant. And then you have Maegor, who all of his children come out as these kind of deformed lizard monster creatures of the type that Daenerys had, as if he was cursed. So if Visenya was dabbling in magic, which is a very Targaryen thing, that's what the Valyrians did. They all dabbled in weird blood magic and created chimeras, as this book says. They dabbled in weird magic, mixing creatures together and stuff like that. So if she did do some kind of magic to have a baby, and it resulted in Maegor, that could explain why all of his children came out the way they did. So what's really interesting about that is it would mean that the entire Targaryen lineage from that point on doesn't stem from Aegon at all. So I don't know. It could be because those two things are mentioned, that she slept around and Visenya might have did blood magic to get pregnant. So, and then he was also kind of like a vicious child too. And a vicious man, Maegor, I mean. But yeah.
Yeah, this is kind of one of those things that we will obviously never know.
No,
So
it's just cool to think about.
It's interesting to speculate on. to my mind, if I were to try and speculate on what would a generic child of Aegon the Conqueror and Visenya the Warrior Queen be, then I think it probably would be roughly what emerged. Similarly,
Maybe.
if I were to say what would a child of Aegon the Conqueror and Rhaenys, the lover of music and the finer things in life, I think that what happened there when you get Aenys and Maegor, the two characters do kind of work for me. Now, should we guess that perhaps it was an interesting thought? I think this kind of draws me back to this idea over on Twitter. I rather facetiously trolled Aziz on Twitter earlier today when he said, he pointed out that we still didn't have any true blood Targaryens who were burned when trying to bond with a dragon, and I tweeted back saying that's because there are no true blood Targaryens, because even if you go back to the mother of the three original Targaryens that we're talking about now, she was a Velaryon, half Targaryen, but it means that all of those three archetypal Targaryens in Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys, they were all at least a quarter Velaryon rather than Targaryen. And then the further on down the family tree you go, the more other Baratheons and Blackwoods and goodness knows what else, all just dropping in all over the place. So the idea that there is this pure Targaryen line that comes down through history, I think, is at the very least hugely overstated. I would personally argue, which then adds this idea that yes, maybe there was something going on there, that maybe Aegon couldn't have children. We've got a biased account to start with.
Yes.
With some rumors, I think we don't know, and I don't think fundamentally it makes a difference to our understanding of the story. Is where I would come to with that.
I just want to say that I don't necessarily think that Aegon was sterile, but as far as Visenya using magic to get pregnant, I think that there could be something behind that, because I like the imagery of her kind of like turning into this old witch crone, hidden away on Dragonstone as the years go by, plotting. So, yeah,
I agree. I think that the impression we get is of her becoming more and more embittered over time, and that may well have been the case, but I think we also have to accept the fact that when we get Maegor the Cruel, then he was being painted by Archmaester Gildain as being
a bad guy.
A bad guy.
Yeah.
He was a bad guy. Let's make no bones about it. But you could hold up what some of the other Targaryens did and say, did he do stuff that was that much worse than what they did?
Yeah.
Yeah, some of the things he did, but at the same time, they did some pretty bad stuff too. So I think we take with a pinch of salt how the different characters are shown, because Gildain is wanting to show where the kind of what the true Targaryen noble character is coming down through. And you can create a few bad guys, but you've got to show that they are bad. I wanted to before we come back to a couple more questions from the chat, I wanted to try and get your thoughts as well on this idea of the three heads of the dragon, because this is a phrase that we hear a lot more. It has to be said out in the community in terms of theory crafting than we actually ever really hear in the books or on the show. But this comes fundamentally from this idea of these three characters, from Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys. This seems to be what Rhaegar was trying to name his children. He got 2/3 of the way through. And so what do you think the link is for our story. We get an awful lot of archetypes that get carried on down through the ages. We get a lot of foreshadowing. What is it that we can learn from these characters for the story we've got now in A Song of Ice and Fire?
Okay, so if we take it just as it is, it seems to indicate that Daenerys will maybe need two husbands, need two rulers alongside her to mount her dragons so that she can face the White Walkers, or that there needs to be three Targaryens to mount dragons, maybe. See, this is one thing that I've gone back and forth on for years. It's like there's so many possibilities, there's so many different, but it's definitely, it's obviously related to the Targaryens. It's got to be. I feel like Daenerys' story itself is like so tied into the fate of the realm and the fate of and what's happening with the White Walkers, that I feel like it can't not have to do with the White Walkers, because it's not just like this is like the Targaryen thing. This is what the Undying say to her. They say the dragon has three heads. They tell her that specifically. Why are they saying this to her? And I think they wouldn't be saying that unless it related to like the grander scope of thing. This does not have to do with just like the Game of Thrones. This is the big fight. So they're telling her, I think in order to prepare for this big fight that's happening, this is what you need. You need to have two other, I guess, people with you to mount the dragon so that you can fight the White Walkers. That's generally where I go with this. What do you think?
I agree. I think that there are many layers to this, as there are in so much of George R. R. Martin's writing. I think that Daenerys is very much being set up within the Aegon archetype. So she is going to be invading, and she is bringing three dragons with her. I don't know whether it's going to happen exactly the same in the books as it happened on the show, but I think that we might see some kind of echoes of the past with the Field of Fire and things like that. So she's clearly being set up as this archetype, and I definitely like the idea of her taking Dragonstone first and therefore launching her invasion from Dragonstone. That kind of works for me. I think that then means that we potentially are looking for three Targaryens, because that's the way it works. And handily, we will have three people who are this is in the books, three people who are either Targaryens or claim to be Targaryens or don't know that they're Targaryens but actually are in herself. Jon, obviously, and Fagon, as I like to think of him. And so I think we've got these three characters, but they're not going to be working with each other in the same way that those three were originally. I think that's an echo that is not repeated. So we shouldn't look for things to happen exactly as they happened before, but sort of stuff that rhymes rather than repeats. I think the more important point for me in terms of the three heads of the dragon is, and this is across the piece with how George R. R. Martin seems to be treating everything to do with prophecy and the like, is what matters more is not the reality of it or the truth of it. What matters more is how people react to it, who believes it, what do they do on the basis of their belief in it. And that fundamentally led to what Rhaegar was getting up to. He clearly was trying to replicate the three original Targaryens. We get what he named his first two children, and then we get that little cutscene in the House of the Undying when we see that he says, "Oh, there must be one more. The dragon has three heads," and the clear implication is that he thinks that he's going to father one more child, and that child is going to be named Visenya. So he's expecting a daughter. So what matters for this story is not so much whether or not this is true, that there must be three heads to the dragon in some way. What matters is the fact that Rhaegar fundamentally believed it to be true, and he believed that he was responsible for making it happen.
Yeah.
And go on.
I was gonna say, yeah, and I always think about the Undying One pushing this to Daenerys too. Because okay, so Daenerys took Shade of the Evening, and I remember when Euron forced his brother to drink the Shade of the Evening, and he says, "This is the drink of truth. There's more truth in this than all the gods of the Seven Kingdoms combined." So I tend to think that everything Daenerys saw when she went into the House of the Undying was true in some sense. It was like the past, the future, the present. Even when she goes in and she sees the Undying ones and they're all young, I feel like that was probably them at some point. That was true at some point in history. It's not them now. But yeah, when it comes when they're telling her the dragon has three heads and all this stuff, yeah, I feel like that has to relate to something bigger. I feel like it has to relate. Maybe it's even kind of like a warning. It's like the dragon has three heads, as in like you're not the only one. You'll have people that are like you, but that will oppose you to some sense, and maybe you'll have to come together. But yeah, that's kind of where I was going with that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that the other thing I would add on with this is that immediately following the reign of Aegon the Conqueror, there was, as there was all through Fire and Blood, there was a discussion and debate about actually who belongs where in the line of succession, who is the actual rightful Targaryen heir. And I think that one of the things we're going to see happen, they've kind of short-circuited it on the show, I think, trying to keep things as clear as possible.
Yeah, they didn't even.
In the books, we're going to have this situation where we've got Dany, who it's probably reasonably clear who she is. Then you get Fagon, who should theoretically be ahead of her in the line of succession, but is he actually who we think he is or who he claims to be? And then we get Jon, who could actually potentially be behind Aegon, but ahead of Dany. But this all depends on whether he's legitimate. And I think that we're going to get an incredibly confused set of circumstances about who might actually be the real Targaryen heir. And I think that that is something which we saw all the way through Fire and Blood, right from the very beginning, who comes where in the succession. It led to the Dance of the Dragons. It led to the whole issue with the Maegor the Cruel with Rhaenys and where they fitted together in the line of succession. And I think that we will see it again in A Song of Ice and Fire once everybody is out in the open. Huge amounts of discussion and different claimants saying that they should be sat on the Iron Throne and believing it. And I think that this is just another iteration of this people trying to grab the Iron Throne, and the story will not end, I think, with one person winning the Game of Thrones and sitting on the Iron Throne.
Definitely not. I don't think we're going to get an ending that wraps up like that. And I actually agree with what you said way earlier in the stream that Daenerys probably won't end up on the throne. I've never really thought that she would. I've always thought that her role was kind of necessarily of kind of a sacrificial nature, if you know what I mean. Because how she's symbolically the mother, and that it's all about Misa and all about this, and it's all about everyone else, really. Like even in the books, especially, it's like I like to point to that scene where she walks outside of the walls of Marine and she kind of lays hands on all the sick and dying people and like helps them, even though it's dangerous for herself. I feel like in the end, Daenerys will probably have to sacrifice herself so that everyone else can live. So that's kind of how I view it. Like, cause she's the mother, she's the sacrificer. That's what she does. And then from that point forward in history, well, she essentially becomes a martyr. You know, she's kind of worshipped probably, and people look back and they think, oh, you know what I mean. So that's how I see that.
Yeah, I think that's it. That's really interesting. A couple of questions just to start rounding us off in the chat. There from Piano Diva 11 and Ygritte Weirwood, both talking about there being lots of Valyrian blood in Westeros. Aegon the Fifth had two sisters who had children, and there's lots of dragonkind in Valyria. I think this is something that again became very apparent in Fire and Blood. We kind of knew it already, but it became very apparent is that we might think that the Valyrian blood or Targaryen blood is a rare thing that only we've been talking about these three characters of Dany, Jon, and Aegon, but they are not the only ones with any Targaryen heritage. We saw, and this is the one thing I have to say, the comment I saw more than anything else on day one when Fire and Blood came out was people just tweeting or commenting that there are a lot of Targaryens, a lot of new names to learn, and loads of them they had bastard children, lots of them married people. Some of them we don't even know what children they had. We don't know the names of a lot of the bastard children. There are huge amounts of people with Targaryen heritage out there. It might just be small amounts, but we shouldn't think that only 2 or 3 people have got Targaryen heritage. There are lots of people out there who have.
Everybody's a Targaryen.
Well, I mean, I don't know whether it's everybody's a Targaryen, but there's a huge amount of Targaryens out there. And so this whole idea of who's a secret Targaryen is a little bit missing the point, in my view, is that there are lots of people who've got bits of Targaryen blood in them. If you look back at the family tree of Daenerys, you'll find technically she's only about an 8th Targaryen. So it's the idea that we've got this kind of pure blood Targaryens, and then there might be, some sort of bastard children off somewhere who don't really matter because they've not got this pure blood, is actually kind of made up. George R. R. Martin's kind of fiddling a bit with it because it is a magical story and all the rest of it. Mm-hmm. But yes, there are lots of Targaryens. This is one of the points I made in my 10 points to take away from Fire and Blood, was that actually there's a huge amount more mixed heritage people than we previously had thought.
Yeah.
And not just the Targaryens, but also there's this fantastic scene when we get Cregan Stark comes down south, missing all the action of the Dance of the Dragons, but he arrives down south with a whole army. And then it turns out that these are the people who they volunteered to leave the north because it's the winter and they didn't have enough food to feed everybody. So these guys have come down south and they don't want to go back up north. So what they're going to do, they marry all of the widows of whose husbands have died in the war that's just happened. Perfect. And so actually we suddenly get, I think it said, thousands of marriages between Northmen, First Men, and people in the Riverlands, presumably Andals. And so actually we've got a huge amount more mixed heritage people than we had previously thought was the case.
The idea of a pure bloodline doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense in the real world. We just kind of have to accept it, I guess, kind of, for like a fantasy book. I don't know. Kind of like close your mind to it, I guess. But then again, it's more about like what they believe about themselves too. Like Daenerys is like, oh, I can't get sick because I'm a Targaryen. So it's like she believes that, but does that make it necessarily true? Like you said, she's only technically an 8th Targaryen. It's interesting.
Yeah, I think that the Targaryens believe their own propaganda is basically what I took from that, is that they thought they were different and special. They thought that they were immune to the laws of gods and men. They thought that they were immune to disease, and they were wrong. And that's just the way of it. Guys, I think we are going to draw to a close now. We've been talking for a goodly amount of time. But Quinn, did you spot any other question perhaps we could round off with coming up from the chat?
Let's see. How did Arya ride Balerion? What do you guys think happened that got him all torn up? A dragon fight? So in this book, well, this is a little bit later. This doesn't have anything to do with Aegon and his wives, but this is a little bit later. This is Rhaena Targaryen's daughter. She flies off on Balerion, goes missing for about a year, comes back. She's infected with some weird fire parasite, and then Balerion has wounds. Well, I speculated in my video that he could have gotten attacked by another dragon. It's pretty obvious that they went to Valyria. I don't know if there's dragons in Valyria, but there could be dragons somewhere off in the far east if they went there as well. I don't discount that he could have gone to the east, somewhere over there in the distance as well. Or he could have been attacked by a fire worm. She's certainly infected with some kind of fire worms, so maybe he got attacked by a much larger fire worm, the ones that were said to live in the 14 fires of Valyria. So that's where I tend to go. He definitely got attacked by some kind of eldritch monster that was strong enough to tear through dragon scale. So that the only thing that I think could have done that would have to be another dragon or a fireworm or something else that we haven't even seen. What do you think about that?
I think you're right. I think I would agree they went to Old Valyria. I think that's where, and I think that Balerion going there rather than Arya wanting to go there.
Yeah.
And I like the idea that perhaps having got there, Balerion might have been defending her against something. That kind of works for me. But as for what it is, yes, it could be a dragon. I just think this was George R. R. Martin trying to actually give us some kind of evidence that there's bad stuff there, but we don't know what it is, because
Yeah.
all through this we've just had these kind of rumors of, oh yeah, people go there and never come back. We had Geryon Lannister who went off and didn't return and things like that. But then we've also got at least one character, Euron, who claims to have gone there and come back and seemed okay. So
He seems okay.
yeah, so I think this is just George R. R. Martin adding to there are some things here we don't need to know exactly what it is. We just need to know that actually, yes, this is a scary and dangerous place. In this monster Balerion, who has been built up all the way through the narrative as being the scariest and most fearsome creature you could possibly imagine, and is anywhere there on that continent, got badly injured. And that should give us some thought to go, oh, that's why people aren't going there, because there is stuff there that is way beyond everything that even we know. And this is, for me, this is a world building thing with mystery, is that we can speculate. And if I were to speculate, it would be something along the same lines as you. I think that what we have probably in Valyria is a lot of things of the same kind of, I don't know, this is probably bad science, but some kind of dragon genus of some kind of way, is that we know that there are wyverns out there in the world which seem to be similar to dragons. There seemed to be whatever it was that was in areas was some sort of fire worms or something that, again,
with faces and hands.
Exactly, they seemed quite dragonish. So to my mind, there probably are dragony things going on there. But exactly whether they were actual dragons or just other things that are like dragons, I think we're invited to leave it to our imaginations and just accept the fact that actually that is a scary place. Doesn't matter, Euron might have gone there and escaped and got back, but it's still an incredibly scary place.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think, guys, I'm going to wrap that one up there. Just very quickly, El, who said, why did Aegon take 2 wives? And why did polygamy die out in the Targ Kings? As for the question about whether Rhaegar annulled Elia or took a second wife, I am doing a video on that one, so I'm going to answer that one properly in a video. Aegon took 2 wives because his first wife, Visenya, he was expected to marry his elder sister, but he loved and lusted after Rhaenys, and so married her as well. So that's what the story we're told about there. When and why did polygamy die out? Well, over time, slowly, they seem to move from marrying lots to having lots of official concubines, as it were. It was really a matter of when the power of the Faith of the Seven came stronger in relation to the Targaryens, was where that kind of flipped. And I was about to just say farewell, but Wessa30 has given us a super chat wanting me to say something else. Thank you so much for that. Just saying we just wanted to hear Robert say Kraken Taco. So there you go. We have it. I have now have it on good authority that I do indeed say Kraken wrong, and it should be Kraken.
Kraken Taco.
But tacos, I'm sorry, I can't change. That's the way that I say it. That's the way that we say it on this side of the Atlantic. Guys, thank you so much. Quinn, why don't you just remind us where people can find you on the internet?
Thank you so much for having me on here. Ideas of Ice and Fire, Facebook, Twitter, and Facebook. Go check me out. I have a podcast, and I make a bunch of A Song of Ice and Fire videos, and videos on science fiction and fantasy. And I really try and go deep and kind of pull out things in the books that I think are interesting to get people to read. So yeah, check me out if you like books.
Excellent. I would highly recommend it. Guys, you know I only have people on here I would personally recommend. I have watched Quinn's videos, and Quinn's videos are excellent. So please do go and check that out. Link down in the description. If you're watching live, there's a link, I'm sure, going on in the chat. Thank you so much for coming on. I've really enjoyed this chat. I think we got really into these characters, and we got a lot of goodness out of this. So thank you again for coming on. Guys, thank you for the chat. There's been some fantastic questions we've been answering. Particular thank you for the super chats, and we'll be back here next week looking at another issue, I think, from Fire and Blood. I think we've got a lot more we can work our way through, pardon me, on this one. Particular thank you to my patrons. If you are interested in supporting this channel or getting access to some extra audio material that I'm putting on there just for my patrons, please do check out the link to my Patreon page. There's a link down in the description. Guys, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this. Take care, and I shall see you again soon.